Hey, so it looks like you just gotten yourself one of these, my Ask Deep Questions cards, the original deck, and you're trying to figure out how to make the most out of this tool to help you get beyond small talk and really get to know people a lot quicker and deeper. One of the reasons why I created this tool is because I felt at one part in my life I was only doing surface level conversations. And I'm really thankful to you that you've joined the community of people that are not afraid of having meaningful relationships, meaningful conversations. By the way, my name is Jan. Like I said, I created these cards. I also call myself a recovering shy guy, a people-loving introvert, and deep connector. And I used to be the shy kid in class that nobody really notices. I was rarely the one who's like raising my hand to contribute, yet I had some great ideas. And also, I really craved these deep, vulnerable conversations, yet it sometimes felt a little bit too awkward to bring up these topics, which is why I'm really surprised that when I first created these cards on a camping trip, it became really popular. It led to some amazing conversations around the campfire, in the canoe. And then when we came back, I did a lot of play testing and set up different workshops and events and deep questions with coffee and deep questions with tacos and deep questions with Thai. And now, a couple years later, the cards have been used on every continent around the world. On my estimations of 48 questions per deck and almost like a little bit over 4,000 cards sold, this means we would have started at least 200,000 conversations that matter, but probably more because this is based on each question, each card only being used once. And I know at least from a few people, they've used them many, many times over. So again, thank you very much for joining this group of people that now has this tool, and you want to find out how to make the most of it. And this is exactly what I want to share with you in this video. Over the next few minutes, I'll share some rules that I introduce, some agreements when I use this with groups around the dinner table, at coffee shops. I showed it to people who are dating or in relationships, and also in workshops. I'll start with how you introduce the cards to your friends who have maybe never heard of this. Like, you found the cards, you bought them, but they have no idea what they're getting into. And then at the end, I'll share some research on why I designed the cards this way and how they work or why they work. Of course, keep in mind, you can, they're basically just cards with questions on them. If you want to come up with your own rules, if you have your own ideas on how to use them, please do it. And also, if you have another deck of conversation starter cards, because let's be honest, this is just one of many decks out there. If you do, a lot of these tips in this video will apply to any type of conversation starter cards. All right, let's get started and talk about how do you introduce the cards to your friends, to your partner, to your family members, to your workshop participants, so they actually are interested in having these conversations. First of all, I have to say that don't force anyone to share if they are not ready to. I hear this every once in a while from someone who gets the cards and is really excited. Oh, I'm going to make my girlfriend answer all these questions. But I would say most of the time that will backfire. It's really, I wouldn't advise it to put people on the spot. What I would do is I would get the cards, get the deck of cards, maybe even open it up and take a few cards out and just put it on the table, put it on the coffee table and let them discover it themselves. And once they pick it up and maybe read through some of the questions and they ask, hey, what is this? This looks really cool. Can we answer some of these questions? Or if they have a question about it, that's when I would introduce it and invite them to maybe pick a question that they would like to talk about. Again, let them be curious about it and explore it on their own time. And then once they're into it, once they're open to exploring it further, that's when I would explain how it works, what are some of the rules that I'm going to go over in the next little while. And The other thing I want to share, if you are inviting people over with the purpose of using these cards, don't make the group too large. I can see that this is great for one-on-one with groups of maybe 4 to 6, kind of the size of group that you can fit around the dinner table. If it gets larger, it's always harder to have one conversation. It's very easy for there to be one conversation at one end of the table and one at the other end. And the magic really happens if this is one group having a conversation over, let's say, a certain time. And talking about time, I would make sure that you have at least 20-30 minutes if you're a group of 3. Like, it's very easy to spend 5 to 10 minutes on one question per person. And lastly, if you yourself feel a little bit anxious about answering some of these questions, I can highly recommend picking a random card, starting with the curious cards, and I'll explain in a moment why, and just journal your answer. Like, answer the question for yourself. And once you get comfortable, then it's time to invite other people into the group. All right. The next thing that is actually really important, in my opinion, is talking about this, giving each other the gift of presence. And what I mean by that is basically this. Let's turn off our little pocket mini computers that we always have with us, because this is one of the biggest obstacles when it comes to being present with each other. We all have been in that situation where you're telling a story and the other person gets a text message or a phone call and they pick up right in the middle while you're still talking, and it makes you feel invisible, ignored, unimportant, all things that are going to kill the connection that you're trying to establish with each other. If you want to get a little bit creative, I can highly recommend creating cell phone sleeping bags, either out of padded envelopes or like here, a little cloth bag that I got on Amazon. And just make sure that the phones are in there at the beginning. And this could almost become a little ritual that you do with your friends, with your participants at the beginning, where we all check in and we make sure that we turn this on airplane mode or on silent and put it away. All right. Next tip that I want to share is all about the 3 different levels. If you've opened the cards, you by now know that there's 3 different types of questions, right? So we have the yellow cards, which are the curious ones. We have the blue that are brave, and we have the red ones that are the vulnerable cards. And the reason why there's 3 different cards is that some of them require you to be, like the name says on the red card, vulnerable. And it's really good to start at a curious level where you're just getting used to answering questions that are below the surface. And then once we all have answered a question of the curious deck, we can move one level deeper to the brave questions. And once we feel comfortable here, that's when I would recommend to go to the vulnerable questions. And this is even with people that you already know quite well, because there is some research that I'll share at the end of this video that says that we need to go on this journey gradually. We can't just jump right in. I talk a lot about building a campfire, and having a conversation is kind of like having a campfire where the big log that we want to light on fire that creates the warmth of our campfire is the vulnerable questions, the red cards. And if I just had a lighter to hold it under this big log, it would not catch fire. Instead, we have to start with our tinder, something that burns really quickly and easily, then our little sticks, add our kindling on top, and at the end we can put the big log on the fire. So start with the curious questions, see how you're doing, then go to brave, then go to vulnerable. And if you never get to the brave questions or the vulnerable questions, it doesn't matter. This is not a game with points. There's no winning for having the best, most vulnerable answer. The goal is just to have a couple of different conversations that are not just small talk. All right, let's jump into what is tip number 4, challenge by choice. Remember, we can't force people to participate. We can't force people to take risks. It has to be their choice. So how do we add this kind of methodology of giving people a choice into the way we use the cards. The first thing I can think of is, well, we just talked about there being 3 different levels of cards, right? So people have a bit of a choice over how deep they go. And sometimes I would say, after doing a round of Curious, I would give everyone the choice to either stick with Curious or go a level deeper. If not everybody agrees to go deeper, I might even stick with everyone doing another round of Curious cards. Again, you don't want people to feel forced to do something because everybody else does it when they don't feel ready. The second thing is, nobody ever should pick a card and say, okay, here's the question for you, Jan. When was the last time you listened to your intuition? Don't do that. Don't ask the question to the other person. Instead, everybody picks their own card, reads the question for themselves, and then decides, is this the question I want to talk about right now? If for whatever reason they feel like, this is too vulnerable for me right now or too uncomfortable to talk about this topic, that's okay. As long as you take one deep breath, maybe even think about what makes you uncomfortable about this question, because sometimes that reveals a lot about yourself as well. And then put it back in the deck, pick a new card, read that question, see if that's the question that you want to answer today. The only thing I would not want to do, unless it's the very first time for someone where they are like unsure if they even want to play, don't read through all of the cards trying to find the one that you want to answer, because there's a lot of magic as well when you realize or when you believe that sometimes it's not you picking the question, it's the question picking you. I have a few experiences where somebody would pick the question about, there's a question about your brightest and darkest thoughts on your birthday. They would pick that question on their actual birthday. I've had a funeral director pick the card, how do you want to be remembered? So there is a certain magic, if you want to believe in it, in just letting the card choose letting the deck choose which question you should answer. And with that in mind, there are no wrong answers. Again, the goal is to have some more meaningful conversations, not to get points or to answer a question correctly. Very often when I read a question, especially some of the deeper ones, I now by accident picked up, how do you want to be remembered? I was just talking about it. Very often the question will just trigger a memory for me. So it's not that I'm answering the question, I have the answer in my head right away, because a lot of these questions you have never thought about, you don't have an instant answer for, but you have an instant memory or thought that pops up. And I like to explore that, like, why did that just come up? And sometimes I just start talking about that to see where the answer is. And already I'm having a very different conversation than if somebody asked me, hey, so what do you do? Or did you watch the game last weekend? Or how was traffic getting in here, right? Goal is to have interesting stories and memories that we share with each other that gives a little bit of a glimpse of who we are beyond the masks that we wear every day, not to have the right answer. Okay. Now that we have talked a bit about the person sharing their answers and memories and stories, I think it's time to talk about one of the most underrated skills, the skill to really listen deeply and listening to understand, not listening to respond. For me, listening, first of all, goes back to being present, like not having this in sight really helps, but also listening is about really being present. It's kind of like meditating, because our mind will always think of other things. When the other person's talking and maybe they're sharing about having gone to Canada, out of all places, on their last vacation, and you're like, oh, but I've been to Canada too, and I'm now thinking about my trip to Canada. Notice that. It's not a bad thing, but then just let that thought go and come back to listening to your partner, to the other person. It takes a bit of practice, but whenever you have these thoughts that are not actually related to what the other person is saying, but your own memories and stories, detach yourself from them, because it's very rare these days that we make each other feel seen and heard. And I think it's a huge gift that you can give to the other person by just being curious and asking follow-up questions. I love to notice when somebody's facial expression changes when they're telling a story, and suddenly they light up, like you can really see it in their face, like their eyebrows go up, they start to smile. That's the moment when I want to ask a follow-up question. I want them to talk more about this. That obviously is something that they love to talk about. So use this as a little tip when you're having conversations, and try to really keep the spotlight on that one person until they get to a natural end. See if there's another follow-up question there to maybe go a little bit deeper, or at least invite them to go deeper. Of course, we're not going to force anyone to answer a question that they don't want to talk about, but often it's the follow-up question, really another person being curious, that unlocks the real meaningful memories. And then if there is nothing else, that's okay too. Just move on to the next person. All right, we are getting to the last tip of this series, and this is the research that I promised you, how to connect deeply. These cards that I've created, they have by now been used on like networking events, creating psychological safety among team members. I know a company that uses them for their onboarding. They've helped therapists build trust with their clients, and coaches and retreats. They've been used in many, many different places. And when I created them, I basically just created them for myself. And the different categories kind of were based on what for me would be a curious, or a brave, or a vulnerable question. And then I just started playtesting and moving the categories around until I found something that I felt was a great experience if a group goes through the 3 different levels. And then afterwards, I found some amazing research that actually talks about why this works. And I would love to share that with you. So in case you get somebody asking, hey, so who created this? What's the research behind it? Of course, there might always be someone, especially if you're planning to use this with an organization that asks these questions. I want you to have an answer ready. So the research this is based on is actually be done by Arthur Aaron. It's called the experimental generation of interpersonal closeness. And he did this study where he learned something that, in my opinion, he has very complicated words to explain. So I'm going to show you the research in a moment here, and we'll go through it step by step, breaking it down so you understand what that means and how the cards fit into it. So he says, one key pattern associated with the development of a close relationship among peers. So how do 2 people get closer, build a closer relationship, is sustained, escalating, reciprocal, personalistic self-disclosure. Right, a mouthful. So let's go through it one by one. Sustained, a different way to say sustained, of course, is it's happening more than once, it's repetitive, it's ongoing. So you can't build this closeness with people by just answering one question. You have to do it more than once on a repetitive basis. And maybe these relationships don't happen instantaneously. If you've ever dated someone, you know you don't necessarily fall in love with a person right away from kind of love at first sight. It takes a bit of time to get to know someone. Although it might have felt that way in the beginning, it usually takes some time to really get to know someone and connect with them. It's the same thing with friendships. So do it more than once. The second thing is escalating. And we just talked about this a couple of times. The reason why I have these 3 different levels of questions is because something needs to escalate, it needs to increase, it needs to go deeper. So think about, starting with the curious questions, going to the brave, and then to the vulnerable ones. By the way, I just remembered another thing about the sustained. If you've ever gone to the gym, trying to work out. You also know that working out once will not get you the result you're looking for. It's the making it part of your routine, going to work out a couple days a week that will actually get you the results. So it's the same thing with friendships, with building connections with people. All right, it's an ongoing investment. Reciprocal. All right. Again, if one person is asking the questions, like I'm the one who has all the cards and I'm like asking, answer this question, answer that question, answer that question. It first of all feels a bit like an interview, but it also doesn't build the connection because it's a very one-sided interaction. So we need to make this a two-way street. Everybody needs to participate. Everybody needs to answer questions rather than one person hosting who's not participating. If you want that trust and the connections to be built between the whole group, if you are hosting a workshop for, let's say, a team and you're the facilitator, of course, it makes sense that you're not part of it because the connection should be happening between the participants. And the last thing, personalistic self-disclosure. What could that be? Well, this is just another way, in my opinion, to say we need to be sharing personal and vulnerable stories, things that are a lot deeper than the usually surface level conversations you might have, let's say around the water cooler at work. If you meet one person every day and all you talk about is weather and traffic and I don't know, other surface level topics, then you're not really getting to building a close relationship. It stays surface level. So if you really want to get closer to someone, you need to be talking about deep and meaningful things. All right, this is the conclusion of my little video. Now I hope that you have some ideas on how to get the most out of my cards and you're ready to get started. And in case you use the cards at a dinner party, at an event, with your partner, with your friends, with your family, I always love to hear from you. When the cards really unlock a meaningful conversation or moment, feel free to connect with me, send me pictures, send me little notes, send me invitations to your wedding if you meet the right person. And if you have any other questions, drop them below. Until then, see you soon.